Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world, and join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling history on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is November 9th, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1959, that crooked WCW ref, Neil Patrick. 1970, the demo god himself, Chris Jericho. 1993, it's the bruiserweight, Pete Dunne. And last but not least, 1999, the luchadora known as Lady Flamer. And we're going to keep that positivity train a-rolling. That's right, these are your pro wrestling history highlights for November 9th. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and going all the way to 1933, where we see Otis Klingman defeat Thor Jensen for the Pacific Coast middleweight title in Eugene, Oregon. A 4-year jump to 1937, Earl McCready defeats George Walker in Wellington, New Zealand to become the undisputed New Zealand Wrestling Union British Empire heavyweight champion. That's a mouthful. Staying in 1937, Bill Weeder defeats the Great Mistifo in Dayton, Ohio to win his second Midwest Wrestling Association light heavyweight title. This also ended the second reign for Mistifo. Making a quick pit stop into the 40s, 1949, Bobby Magnoff defeats Jake Claiborne for the Hawaii heavyweight title in Honolulu, Hawaii. Moving to 1950, Billy Goals defeats Gypsy Joe to win the Wisconsin Junior heavyweight title in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 6 years later in 1956, Lou Thesz defeats Whipper Billy Watson to win his second NWA World Heavyweight title. That next year in 1957, Ivan Bornov and the Great Malenko defeat Frankie Talabar and Leon Graham for the MWA Ohio Tag Team titles in Columbus, Ohio, ending Talabar and Graham's second reign. Grooving into the 60s, 1961, Lord James Blears and Neff Maivia defeat Shoulders Newman and Ted Travis for the NWA Hawaii Tag Team titles in Honolulu, Hawaii. Then, in a rematch that same night, lose the belts right back to Newman and Travis. The next year in 1962, Fred Blassie begins his second reign as the recognized World Heavyweight Champion in the state of Georgia, defeating Jake Smith in Atlanta in a rematch from their meeting 2 weeks earlier for the title, also in Atlanta. The title had been immediately held up following that prior match. A 2-year jump this time to 1964, Terry Garvin and Chin Lee are awarded the Gulf Coast version of the NWA Southern Tag Team titles when the previous champions, the Corazons, Joe and Gene, leave the territory 2 weeks earlier. Our final stop in the groovy 60s, 1968, Kentaro Ohiki defeats Buddy Austin for the vacant All-Asia heavyweight title in Seoul, South Korea. The title had been vacant since 1963, following the death of then-champion Ricky Dozen. Grabbing my bell-bottoms and going to the 70s, 1973, Wahoo McDaniel defeats Strong Kobayashi for the IWA World Heavyweight title in Wakahama, Japan. Staying in 1973, Chris Colt and Bobby Main defeat Tito Montez and Kurt Von Steiger to win the NWA Western States Tag Team titles in Phoenix, Arizona. A 2-year jump to 1975, Terry Funk defeats Paul Jones in a tournament final for the vacant NWA United States Heavyweight title in Greensboro, North Carolina. The title was vacated due to champion Johnny Valentine suffering a career-ending injuries in a plane crash on October 4th, also involving Ric Flair, Tim Woods, and Bob Bruggers. The last stop in the disco-ducking 70s, 1976, the Spoiler defeats Bill Watts for the Mid-South version of the NWA North American Heavyweight title in Shreveport, Louisiana, ending Watts' fourth reign and starting the Spoilers' second. Grabbing my boombox and making two stops in 1985. First, Dutch Mantel defeats Phil Hickerson for the Continental Wrestling Association International Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee. This ended Hickerson's third reign and began Mantel's second. Our second stop in 1985, Bobby Yeagers defeats Ricky Vaughn for the NWA Pacific Northwest Heavyweight title in Portland, Oregon, his third title win. That next year in 1986, on a card promoted by Bill Watts' Universal Wrestling Federation in Tulsa, Oklahoma, two titles change hands. Bill Irwin and Leroy Brown defeat John Tatum and Jack Victory to win the UWF Tag Team titles, and Savannah Jack defeats Buddy Roberts for the UWF Television title. One last stop in the 80s, 1987. Jeff Jarrett defeats Jimmy Jack Funk to win the NWA Mid-American Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, beginning Jarrett's fifth reign. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1991. Eric Embry defeats Tom Pritchard for the USWA Southern Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, starting his third run with the belt and ending Pritchard's second. A 5-year jump to 1996. The Bruise Brothers defeat Brian Christopher and Wolfie D for the USWA Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee, to start their fifth reign with the belts. And last but not least, 1997, the infamous Montreal Screwjob goes down. Those were your short but sweet pro wrestling history highlights for November 9th. I'm the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow.